Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 93. Our present level patron, Matt, has gone back to the theme well, and this time he has chosen quipping. So, very serious topic. This is no laughing matter. There will be no jokes whatsoever in this episode.
And we just decided we are no longer podcasting. Thank you and have a good day.
Before we get started, last weekend was my live stream for Extra Life. I did complete the 1,000-piece puzzle. It took me 6 hours, 19 minutes, and 44 seconds, which was probably, I would say, about 3 hours longer than I wanted to be sitting at the table because sitting hunched over my dining room table working on the puzzle was just not a super enjoyable experience. But thank you to everybody who donated. Thank you to everybody who came by the room and offered support while I was streaming on Twitch. I will say that I'm looking at another potential video game live stream coming in a few weeks. This one will be much less intense on my neck, and I can just sit and look at a TV screen. Also want to mention this is the last week for nominations. So next week, we're going to announce the nominees for our 100th episode award show. So go to capesonthecouch.live/nominations and get those nominees in. Go back through the last 90-something episodes, where if there's something that just pops in your head and you say, hey, I think this is a really good Marvel episode, or I think Anthony's voice was, really just a good impression on this one, or I think Anthony didn't know what the hell he was doing in this particular skit as far as the voice was concerned. And again, there are one or two that I'm definitely looking at for the to add to the nominees of folks that have already suggested those for the worst vocal performance in a skit. Luckily, no one has recommended Doc yet. No one has nominated Doc for any of either the good or the bad. So I don't know if what that says.
Yeah, especially since I'm not using a special voice at any time.
This is true. This is true. This is just your natural way of speaking. But in any case, quipping. Matt does love his theme episodes. And so we are going to be talking about the notion that characters like to crack jokes, particularly in the midst of a fight. Quipping in comics is basically as old as the medium itself. You go back to some of the earliest Golden Age comics. It wasn't as prevalent as it is now, I will say that. But there are still plenty of instances in the 30s, 40s, and 50s where superheroes, costumed crime fighters are not only beating up the villains, but bruising their egos, shall we say. And so Matt's comment, and one of the things that he always likes to give, not just the theme for the episode, but something to spark the discussion. He said, it's hailed as a sign of wittiness, but let's call it for what it is, a mechanism for covering up the manifestations of anxiety in high stress situations. It's still a problem screaming for attention, and there has to be better ways to deal with it. And so, as I said, this has existed basically throughout comic books, but it really ramped up in the 1960s. And we have the late, great Stan Lee to thank for that, because he wrote almost all of his characters as witty jokesters in the midst of a battle. And no one personifies this more than Peter Parker. Spider-Man is the patron saint of quipping in a battle. So much so that if Spider-Man is not cracking a joke, something is horribly wrong. If Spider-Man is fighting you and he is quiet, you done messed up real bad. Yep. You either threatened a member of his family or you crossed the line. Because Spider-Man is very jokey, happy-go-lucky. But if you think about it, someone with that speed and power, if he is focusing all of his attention on whooping your ass, you're not coming back from that.
We see Yeah.
It was wonderfully lampshaded in one issue where he was quiet and he wasn't fighting anybody. He started off a little bit and they said, Spider-Man is quiet. We really messed up. We surrender. Like, we don't want any part of a silent Spider-Man. He had laryngitis.
Well, I was going to say we touched on this in the Kingpin episode where Fisk was in prison and Peter was right there to meet him, and it didn't go well.
No, it did not. No. Now, on the flip side, the complete, I would say, not complete opposite, but largely opposite Spider-Man is Batman. Batman doesn't talk when he's fighting, at least not in a joking fashion. If Batman is speaking in the midst of a fight, it's largely coordinating with the other members of the Bat family, the other members of the Justice League. That's Batman's role, speaking wise, in comics. So since he's quiet, that leaves the room for the Rogues Gallery to crack jokes, or the Robins. The comic relief, such as it is in the Bat family, has largely been put on the shoulders of Robins. And we'll be getting to Tim Drake in a couple of weeks because Ariel has to finish it off. Still no Stephanie Brown or Carrie Kelly, but we'll get to them, I'm sure, at some point. But each of the Robins are funny and chatty in their own way. Dick, Tim, Jason, Damian, etc. But they all are the ones who are talking in the midst of the fight. And so you've got Spider-Man on the one extreme, Batman almost on the other. I would say another example is Frank Castle.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Castle's not really cracking jokes. Right. He may make a one-liner before he shoots you, but that's it. In the midst of a gunfight, Frank isn't really trying to talk you down. Right. He's trying to gun you down, mostly also because I think it's just very difficult to be heard over a gunfight. And Frank is going to let his bullets do the talking for him. Most characters, I would say, fall somewhere in the middle, leaning closer to the Spider-Man jokey side. And I would also say that the way that the MCU has impacted the comics in Marvel over the last decade, they've all been a lot jokier. They've been a lot more witty, in keeping with the whole notion that all of the comic versions of Marvel have been tweaked to better fit their MCU counterparts. Corporate synergy, yay. So there's a lot of joking. And Matt also said in his thing, which I will push back a little bit, he said, Hawkeye is a guy who complains during a fight that he can't fight and talk at the same time. I would push back on that and say that's very dependent on the writer. Ultimate Hawkeye, yes. Ultimate Hawkeye was very clear saying, I can't talk and fight at the same time because I have to focus all my attention on the fight. But 616 Clint Barton definitely has done more than his fair share of comments, jokes. We saw that in the Fraction run. We see that in many ways as the Fraction run has colored the characterization of Hawkeye since then. We see that a lot in modern comics. So I would push back a little bit and say Clint is not as jokey as Spider-Man, but he's on the more talkative side. He's certainly not a guy who's quiet. Now, Captain America, he may make an occasional comment, but he's more akin to Batman. Cap's not really going to chat much while he's fighting. I don't know. Doc, is there, being a little more on the DC side, is there a DC character that pops out at you
Green
that's
Arrow.
very witty?
Easy outer. He does it all the time. Flash, Barry, you already said it. I mean,
yeah. Now Barry, we're going to get into that in just a sec when we get into the quote unquote issues. But it's so well. Let's just get right into that then. So since this is a theme episode, the format's going to be slightly different, but we do want to still want to talk about some of the issues. The first and most obvious point is time. The extent to which characters are able to speak in the midst of a battle is largely a function of the medium. In TV tropes, this is called talking is a free action. The name is derived from Dungeons and Dragons, but the point remains that because the writers and the artists have the whole panel with which to fill action, they've got to say something.
Right.
But it seems almost to the point of ludicrous that these characters can squeeze such verbose words into what theoretically should be a very short amount of time.
Right.
And to wit, Barry Allen should be able to be heard by anybody except other speedsters. And even then, I would posit it's likely violative in physics. It's likely a violation of physics in some fashion. I'm not really sure how, but I know that sound needs air to travel. But if you're moving faster than the air, every word you speak, every syllable should be like a sonic boom. Barry Allen, in theory, should be like Black Bolt when he's moving, but he's never done that. And I'm sure the answer is probably Speed Force. But my point is, that's the first thing. So I don't really know that's an issue per se, but it's just...
that's more, you give that to med students and say, so does that mean that Barry's lung collapses or explodes? So I'm not going to get into that. But the other point with time, first, I'm going to give credit to the people writing these comics, because let's remember, although it is a visual media, it's a still visual media. So we're seeing a panel with word bubbles or word balloons that are supposed to be a continuum of a certain amount of time. It's not just a fragmented 1 second moment. So I'll give a little bit of leeway there. But even then, anybody that's a fan of any mixed martial arts or traditional strict martial arts or any combat sport or any athletic competition, you'll hear talking, you'll hear back and forth, but it's not during the most intense moments. You can't do it. It takes too much energy, too much effort. So yeah, it's just wrong. It's inaccurate. But there's another thing about this. You mentioned the time part. There's a certain amount of reactivity. When we mention the fact that these are quips, we're saying that they're quick, that they have some level of substance that you're going to get, and it makes you think. When you're in a fight or flight situation, that's the exact opposite of what you're doing. You're in the moment. You're not using your brain power at that time to come up with something outside of the circumstance, or at least the overwhelming majority of people, even people trained to deal with high stress situations, they don't do. You're acting on instinct, you're acting on training, or you're acting on pure emotion, and you're going to deal with the result afterwards. So you may still get those jokes and quips and whatnot, but you're not going to get it in the moment. You're going to get it after the fact. Or you might get it leading up to the event if it's something that's anticipatory. You're not going to usually get it during. And any type of banter that you get during the situation is usually not something that sounds like it was made up by a writer over the course of the past several weeks to get the phrasing just right when they finally have to release this to print. It's more along the lines of something that is much more visceral and much more meant to get a response, as in just a immediate reaction from the other party. So it's going to be something similar to, I'm going to use what I know in basketball trash talk, or the most famous would be, because you pointed out people don't usually talk during these situations, and I just said the same thing. But Muhammad Ali is one of the most famous athletes of all time, famous people of all time, and yet he was known to talk a lot. In the ring, though, it wasn't that he said many things, and it wasn't that he said things that were so overly witty that people remember them. It was just in the moment, it captured something that was important. So when he actually said in the ring, "What's my name?" it was after he had changed his name from Cassius Clay. Or saying to George Foreman, "Is that all you got?" That's not exactly something that you think of like, oh, that's so shocking. How could he have come up with that? Like, no, it was just, we're in a fight and are you exhausted? There's
Come on, you chump.
So things like that, it doesn't take much. And that's more traditionally what we deal with as human beings. So the main dissonance and disconnect that we notice in comics is that you can tell that these are contrived. That doesn't make them any less funny. That doesn't make them any less useful. But it does mean that we get a certain expectation as to how people are supposed to think in circumstances. And this is true for youth, for people that are reading these things at a young age. They think that this is how we're supposed to respond to stress or respond to trauma, that you come up with something that is intelligent, insightful, that somehow degrades the opponent while also lifting yourself, all while doing everything flawlessly. I'm sorry, that's not reality. So it's a pretty big setup for failure, in my opinion.
Interesting. I would not have considered that you would say that quipping could actually be detrimental to your psyche.
Don't get me wrong. I'm gonna get to the other side. Don't worry.
Okay, that's fair. What I was going to say is, going back to what you were saying at the start, that you're in the moment and that, from a realistic standpoint, you're working on fight or flight. One of the, I guess, the in-universe explanations for why Spider-Man quips so much is that his brain is operating at such a fast level that everything is sort of slowed down for him. And so he uses the humor and he has all this additional brain power that he then devotes to the jokes, which is why if he's quiet, that means he's not distracted. He's not thinking about anything else other than beating the piss out of you. And that's when you should be worried. If he's joking, yeah, he's going to kick your ass, but you'll survive it. If he's quiet, you done seriously goofed.
Fair enough.
So the second thing that we're talking about is wit as distraction versus wit as humor. And we do see quips that work. Typically, it's either or. Sometimes it can be both. But the idea that you're going to say something so outlandish to get in your opponent's head and go, what? To throw them off their game versus just a humorous observation. And again, I would say Spider-Man, again, as the patron saint of this, does both very well in equal measure. It tends to be more humorous, but there are times when he does look for a distraction. And I would also say that I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, but I'm certain that there are moments where a character that is not known for quipping makes a comment specifically to throw their opponent off of their game. And that's definitely more on the distraction versus humor standpoint.
All right. So remember how I said that it can be a detriment and we were going to get to the other side? Well, we're getting to the other side now. So humor as a defense mechanism for serious events in life is absolutely amazing. And I'm going to even dive further when we get to the next point. But to say that when you are dealing with someone that may not see the world the way you do, or simply because of circumstances, you have to overcome an obstacle and it involves other people that don't want you to succeed or just have a different vantage point, and you're going to have to either outlast them or outsmart them, or if it's a competition, just do better than them. Sometimes it's a good idea to throw a random monkey wrench in there. And sometimes it's happened on this podcast where either I will say something that stops Anthony in his tracks or he'll say something that stops me in my tracks. And we're not even trying to mess each other up. It's just simply the idea that you need someone's brain to take a pause to process what you're saying. And if you can do it in a way that it's least expected, then it's amazing. I'm thinking to situations like political debates. I'm thinking of just those moments where people are in a certain environment and things do seem very tense, and someone makes just the perfect joke or just the perfect comment that gets everyone to burst out laughing. Even if it's not relevant to the situation, you automatically feel better. Laughing, it produces endorphins. It allows you to experience something in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise. So you end up mixing the combination of high energy, quick impulsivity, and the need for quick action at the same time as something that's considered pleasurable. You add all of that up and you can have a powerful combination. So I'm not saying that this doesn't exist. I don't want to make it sound like comics get it all wrong. It's just that you're not going to usually get that in the fight itself or in the battle. You're usually going to get that more in the lead-in or the aftermath. So on one hand, you can say something that is, as you already said, outlandish or bizarre, and it simply doesn't register with the other person in a way that they can understand, in which case you've already won. You basically shut their brain off for a certain period of time. Or it may be a situation where you want the other person to actually understand where you're coming from. And your interpretation of reality is similar, but just slightly changed to the point that even if they don't laugh at it, they may pause and say, I just never thought of the world that way. And when you can strike someone in that direction, it can actually lead to a better dialogue about something that otherwise wouldn't be possibly a good situation or a good conversation. It doesn't have to be adversarial. So I think it goes beyond just the idea that you're trying to get a wisecrack off to keep your game sharp. It becomes a situation where I wonder if having a sense of humor and being able to demonstrate that in the face of adversity, I can still find some level of humanity and joy. Are you willing to join me on this journey that may sound puzzling and strange, but will make us both better for it? Except instead of saying it that way, which is very long and convoluted, you usually say it in a matter of 3 or 4 words that the person is able to parse together a little slower than you were.
The armor-piercing question.
Yep, or as I like to say sometimes, the needle scratch.
That's why I always found the expression, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, to be just flat out wrong. I think a physical injury you can heal, and yes, you may have the occasional long-lasting damage from it, but words can hurt in a way that nothing else can. And Matt's watching this, and I remember Matt specifically saying at some point, probably back when we were in college, that he explained at one point to maybe his high school counselor or something that, oh no, I'm not going to get into, I would never hurt anyone physically. Psychological damage is much worse and way longer lasting. Something to that effect. And It's absolutely true that we all, every single one of us, it's part of the human condition, the baggage we carry from something that somebody said to us when we were at a young age or impressionable or at a point in our life that we thought something was going one way. And then we realized, or somebody said something to us and it just hit us in a very particular way, that it can change, as you said, change your worldview. It can break the glass that you've maybe encased yourself in. And I know I've told the story before, but Doc is responsible for doing that to me. It was a glass shattering moment, that a crack he made when I was working, quote unquote, working as an attorney. And I didn't have a full-time job. And he made a comment that just cut right to the heart of it. And
yeah, and I even remember because you had to remind me of it years later. And I'm like, I've said so many things over the years. What on earth was the one thing I said? And when you said it to me, I'm like, I remember it, but I honestly didn't think it was that crucial.
That's the thing is, but for me, it was just another Tuesday sort of deal. Like, to you, it was just a crack that you made. To me, it was, oh shit, I really need to get my ass in gear and get my shit together. So that's the sort of thing that can happen And it could be a quip. It can be in real life. It can be less humorous and more dramatic than that. But the point is that we're focusing here on the quipping, that you can change somebody's worldview just on a dime like that, or you can make somebody rethink everything around them. And I'm going to bring it back to Spider-Man again. And I feel like we referenced this not that long ago, but I don't remember where we were talking about it, but it was the Superior Spider-Man when Otto Octavius had taken over Peter Parker's body.
Mm-hmm.
And then Peter ends up regaining control of his body and mind. And now he's fighting Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, who is under the impression that he's still fighting Otto in Peter's body. And Peter makes a comment, well, at least I never carried a man purse, something along those lines. And there's just a zoom in on Goblin's face and his eyes narrow and he goes, you, because he knows immediately that's not Otto. That's the real Spider-Man. That's that's Spider-Man who would make that sort of a joke to him. Otto would never do that because Otto is too busy just being ruthless and efficient.
Yep.
Peter is going to kick your ass and make you feel bad about your fashion choices while he does it. And again, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Just the armor piercing question or Wham line or any of those types of things that in comics we see all the time. It's not just in comics. I mean, we're only talking about comics, but it happens in media in general and in real life. As you said, the record scratch, the, oh, huh.
Yeah.
Things that make you go, mm-hmm.
Yeah. I only say that because I do that once in a while. And at this point in my life, at some point, I think I'm going to end up trying to tally the times that it was intentional versus the times it wasn't. Because at this point, I'm pretty sure the times that were unintentional greatly outnumber the times that I tried to do it on purpose. And that's,
yeah.
I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but at this point, it's inherent to who I am, which is going to lead into the third point.
Well, that's a good thing. But point 3, and this is, we talk about the difference in characters and characterizations, and some characters are quippier than others. Personality and situation are key. And this is why some quips can backfire in the wrong crowd. I think also from a meta perspective, that readers, longtime readers of a particular character, fans of a particular character who have come to know and appreciate a given characterization, if they start becoming more humorous, or maybe if they were always funny and they're less humorous, fans go, that's not them, because you have this clear idea of who a character is, how they would handle a certain situation, or at least the fans have come to expect, for better or worse, how a character is going to react in a given situation. And if that changes, the feedback can be negative from a fan perspective, but also even in universe, that sometimes quips can backfire and it can get a hero in trouble, or it can put their friends in danger, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe we should talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I'm going to admit I'll make this one a little personal. So in healthcare, this is something that some people may be aware of and many people may not. And it's true in other fields too, but this is what I know. There's a term called gallows humor. And what that references is the idea that you see so many things that are either tragic or gruesome or just not something that you would usually want to be exposed to on a regular basis. And the way that you end up processing that psychologically is you make jokes out of it. It is something that is very common. And in my opinion, something that is very normal, but not everyone does it. So you end up in a situation where you have to know who does that on a regular basis and who does not. And depending on whether or not you more tend to be outgoing about that type of humor, or you tend to hide it, or you simply just don't want to do that and you don't do that, so you avoid it, it can create some interesting dynamics at work. I've definitely been in situations where people would make a joke about something that was very serious, and I swear to you, it does seem like a sitcom. You would have half the room just like bursting in laughter and the other half cringing and walking away and saying, okay, I clearly want nothing to do with this. And I will admit, I fall into the first category, as Anthony can definitely attest to, mainly because when I say a person introduces it, and it's usually me. But at this point, I've learned my lesson.
This is my shocked face.
I've learned my lesson. I definitely make sure I know the people around that have that similar style of how they handle things. So I'm using that as the personal example, but it doesn't have to be gallows humor. It can be any type of attempt at humor in a circumstance that may or may not call for it, or the audience, if it's, let's say you're in front of other people and you're leading a talk, the audience may not get it the way that you intended. You may not know that ahead of time. You're taking a chance. Anytime you are attempting humor, and there are books that describe the different types of humor available or what the elements of humor are that make something quote unquote funny. But if you don't reconcile the two, or at least make an acknowledgement that you're trying to reconcile the two, you can actually wreck relationships this way. I'm talking professional relationships, personal relationships, romantic relationships, all of it. If you don't do something about it ahead of time to make sure that the people on both sides know what this is about. You don't want to alienate people just because you want to release those endorphins on a more regular basis. Most people would say smiling and laughing is way better than crying and screaming and being angry. That's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those other emotions don't exist under the surface. And I think that's part of what Matt was getting at with this situation. There's a difference between trying to process difficult emotions in a way that are going to allow you not to have lasting trauma, and simply trying to get a reaction out of everyone as a shock jock because you know that them having reactions takes the burden off of you having to deal with those serious situations in a different way. So it's something that we have to be very careful about. The other part that I wanted to bring up when I say personality and situation are key, as I alluded to with myself, some people are more prone, not just because they were written that way as a character, but some people are more prone to try and do these types of mental gymnastics than others. Some people simply take things at face value and they're willing to face them head on without trying to make extra comments or jokes on the side. And that's okay. Some people, if they don't make a joke, they're going to burst. They're going to feel like there's something that's missing and they're not going to feel fulfilled in life. And that's fine. The spectrum is fine. Oh yeah.
I'm pointing to myself for the folks that are just listening.
Both sides are fine. It's just that if you're not aware of who is who and you don't have a conversation, not a attempt to one up one another. It's painful when someone who doesn't like cracking wise trying to join in on the conversation just to fit in. That becomes incredibly awkward. At the same time, if you're the one person making that type of attempt and nobody is interested, that's awkward. So it's never going to be perfect, but at least acknowledging that it's going to happen once in a while and it may not go perfect and we can still go about our business. It creates the proper blend of people so that we all have a better experience overall. In other words, you always have that group where you know somebody's going to say something that's a little off kilter. Someone's going to be lighthearted about it. Someone's going to dive deep and accidentally bring up a topic they shouldn't have. Someone's going to be very quiet about things and just won't really want to say anything in the moment because they have to process it in their own way, in their own time. All of those things, let me make this clear. All of those things are okay in their own right, as long as you allow yourself to recognize that's who you are. Don't try and put yourself in another person's skin just for the sake of fitting in a moment like that, because I think that produces worse results.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say that so much of it comes down to know your audience.
Mhm.
I mean, that's basically what you're saying. Know your audience. There are jokes that I'm going to make with you and our group of friends that I would never make with my coworkers, because I know that my coworkers have not just a single stick, but a whole forest of trees up their ass. They are ossified redwoods at this point, buried up their rectal cavities. So I'm not going to make some of the comments that I would make with you or our poker buddies. If some of the things that we say during our regular poker nights were to get released to the public, we'd all be stripped of whatever professional licenses we had, and we'd be tarred and feathered and run out of town.
You're right. We'd never be able to, call Cincinnati Reds games ever again.
Oh, speaking of quipping within a quipping discussion about quipping, we are like through the looking glass here on the meta.
Which is funny because I know I wouldn't even have made that comment that particular announcer made anyway, because it wasn't even a quip. It was just a very stupid thing to say.
Absolutely.
But I get your point though. That's what I was going for there. Just the idea that.
But you have to know your audience, and I know myself, and I'm sure it's happened to you, where you think the audience is going to receive something well, and they don't.
So I have a very good example of that. This was my first year as an attending at the hospital that I currently work for. And it was a symposium on geriatric psychiatry. So in other words, the elderly. And there were a few speakers. I was not one of the speakers, but I basically served as the MC. So my job was to introduce each of the speakers. So in this case, it was a social worker who had been, to be blunt, she had a lot of experience. And she is Jersey born and raised. She went to Keene. She had a fantastic resume, because I got the resume of everyone that I was supposed to introduce. And I thought, in my mind, I was trying to point out that she had lots of experience. So I said that the next person you're about to hear, I should let you know, finished her undergraduate degree the day I was born. And I hear the loudest "oh" groan from the audience. And I realized that, oh my God, I just came over as this ageist, absolutely naive and rude, upstart physician trying to downplay a social worker, which clearly was not my intention, because I've worked directly with her. I still do. And she's amazing. And I think she's amazing. She knows I think she's amazing. But because of the audience and not even taking that into consideration, it sounded denigrating. And that's something that I regret. I did apologize immediately. I pointed out our positive relationship. She did a great job with her presentation. But at the same time, I realized, I said, you know what? I will never try and make a joke about someone's resume ever again. That's not fair. That's their professional resume. This is what they earned. They deserve that respect. They don't deserve jokes, even if I think the joke is supposed to be uplifting. So I learned my lesson. I've never done that again. Anytime I've introduced someone, I simply read the resume and that's that. But I know that's who I am. So I reserve the jokes for after the fact, talking to people offhand and getting it out of my system that way, as opposed to ever doing that in a microphone or with any group of people. I'm just letting you know, like, I'm not saying this from an area of privilege. I clearly know that I always need to do a better job. That was a low point for me, and I'm willing to admit that. But at the same time, I'm telling the honest intention, and it was not something that I planned ahead of time. It was something I said in the moment, and right afterward, based on the reaction, I was like, I screwed up. I just did it totally wrong. So if anybody's been there with me, I'm just saying, I feel your pain. And if you haven't been there with me, thank goodness. I'm glad you have a better sense of understanding than I did.
Yeah. Well, again, it's something that comes with experience, which is ironic given the topic of the situation and the topic of your joke. I made what I thought was funny. It wasn't even my joke. It was one of those things. I was reading a comment from a Reddit thread, which was my first mistake, but I was reading it during lunch with coworkers. It was related to football, and somehow it brought up, I don't remember the exact context, but it referenced Michael J. Fox. And I thought, as we've alluded, it's very dark humor.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the greater the juxtaposition between where you think a joke is going and the actual punchline, the greater that span, the funnier it is for me.
Right. And
because the greater the subversion.
Yeah, we both have that part as one of the major points as to what makes us laugh. That's not true for everyone.
That is definitely not true for everyone. And it is certainly not true for my coworkers. And so I proceed to read this joke and I am cackling, laughing for about 3 seconds. And then I realize they are staring daggers at me and like, how could you even say that? That's not funny. Da, da, da. And I was like, but now I feel like an even bigger asshole because I'm cackling at this joke.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, okay, I can't say this stuff. I could have turned around and said it at poker, or I could have told you and you would have laughed your ass off. But my coworkers, not so much. So it comes down to knowing your audience. And that's true for superheroes. That's true for real people. So you have to know what it is you're saying. Now, is every single offensive joke funny? No. Because especially as I've gotten older, I've come to laugh less at punching down, shall we say, punching down humor. But again, the juxtaposition of the intended punchline or where you think a joke is going, and then the subversion, the greater that gap, the funnier I think it is.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's
not every comic book writer has that deft handle on how they want to write the characters. And that's why certain jokes in the hands of certain characters is never going to go over well, because these types of jokes that you and I are discussing are never going to come out of the mouths of comic book characters, largely because they've got multi-billion-dollar corporations behind them, and they're never going to want to make a joke in a comic that's going to piss off or alienate a large section of fans. And even now, you've got Dan Slott, who's publicly apologizing for some of the fat jokes that Spider-Man has made over the years about Kingpin, Doc Ock, etc. He's like, there's other ways that he could do that. I apologize for the body shaming. And it's gotten some blowback from the fans who go, it's not that bad. And then you have, heavier fans saying, thank you. We appreciate that you're not going to, have him. Right. So again, it all depends on who's reading, who's writing, the scenario. You have to know your audience. And it's very difficult in comics, given the size and scope of the audience.
Part of that has to do, as you already said, the audience, but just the idea that Matt, I think, has hit spot on. There's tension, there's anxiety in situations that, if it's not resolved, just simply builds like a snowball rolling downhill. And a quip or a joke or anything like that is meant to immediately break that tension. When it works, it's amazing. When it doesn't, it's as if you decided, well, instead of a snowball, we're going to have an avalanche. So it's definitely a razor's edge. You don't know which way it's going to go depending on how high stakes the situation is. So, I right now I'm just hearing my dad like yelling in my head, like, you have to be careful, man. You can't just say everything that comes to mind. You're going to get in so much trouble. You and Tony are going to either end up in jail or you're going to get your asses kicked because of the things you say. You have to be careful. And yet he would say these things as he would proceed to say things that were even more brutal than either you or I would say, just to make me laugh in the moment, to let him know that he understands simultaneously.
Oh yeah, Pops can cut, man. Pops can. Your dad says some stuff sometimes that I go,
yeah.
But I know where you get it from. There's no question. You are your father's son.
Yeah,
without question. So let's take a short break. We'll plug a couple shows, and then we get back. We can talk about treatment options,
whatever,
such as they are. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hi, Hi there. We're so sorry to interrupt your regular podcast listening, but we just wanted to introduce ourselves. I'm Bonnie.
And I'm Anna, and we're the hosts of Freudian Sips, a podcast about brains, beverages, and other BS.
We are a mother and daughter who are both licensed counselors, and we like to get together every week or so we can have a glass of wine and talk about whatever cool psychology things interest us and our listeners.
So if you want to hear two slightly tipsy therapists chat about historical psychology theories and the people who made them, questionably ethical experiments, mental health and illnesses, and other fascinating stuff, then you should listen to us.
So pour yourself a drink and tune into Freudian Sips on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Cheers.
Greetings and salutations. This is Cage's Kiss, the ultimate Cage cast, where we discuss the movies and life of the national treasure, Nick Cage.
There are three of us here, and I can't help but notice that none of us are Nicolas Cage. Did nobody call him?
What? A Cage cast with no Nick Cage?
No, instead of being Nicolas Cage, we're three Nicolas Cage experts, which is the next best thing.
I don't think we should admit to being experts.
Too late.
We are not experts at anything. We are not life coaches, and we are not in any way, shape, or form qualified to give you suggestions on life choices.
But Nick Cage is, and he's made hundreds of life choices.
Seriously, I cannot stress enough just how much you should not take our advice.
But we're experts.
No, seriously, we're not experts.
Yes, but we will be reviewing his first acting gig as Nicholas Coppola, Best of Times, which features a young and very precious Crispin Glover.
And his work in Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
And his work in My Nightmares.
We're experts.
Hi, this is Al Ewing, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. So, given that this is a theme episode, and given that this isn't really a problem per se, but we still want to discuss treatment such as it is, let's talk about less on the quipping and more on the anxiety and the stress.
Yeah.
And Matt even said in his sort of, nomination for this, he said, there are certainly far less healthy coping mechanisms than cracking a joke. So on the scale of how are you handling this stressful job? I'm drinking myself half blind so I can sleep at night, or I make a really off-color comment every once in a while. I'd still side with the off-color comment. At least that's not going to give you cirrhosis.
Right.
But what are some of your suggestions for treatment options?
Sure.
Such as it is.
Because you, at least in my experience, you can't force someone to start liking jokes. It's either you like them or you don't. So I don't really stress that part. If you already have that type of humor as part of your defense mechanism repertoire, fantastic. Good for you. If you don't worry about it. If you have more of a physical, visceral response to stress, then you might need to combat it in a similar way. So finding what types of exercises that allow for that energy release. Me personally, I like high intensity interval training. Some people like long distance running. Some people like lifting weights, or a combination thereof. Yoga, meditation, deep breathing, mindfulness. So many options that have nothing to do with whether or not you're actually going to crack up laughing. And there's another thing I want to do, which is create a nuance when we talk about this, whether it's quips or whether it's really long form jokes or just amusing anecdotes that don't go anywhere, much like this podcast. Then regardless, the point is there's a continuum. Not everything that makes you laugh has to have that response every time. If something makes you slightly smile because it's humorous, that's a good thing. If something turns your mood from totally scowling to less scowling, that's still a good thing. If it's a matter of you can't breathe because you're laughing so hard and this is the greatest thing you've experienced since the last time you can remember feeling that way, that is an amazing thing. But it doesn't have to always be that way. I'll be honest, and I've never discussed this with anybody, but there was a time where I would actively try and seek out comedians, specials, or looking at IMDb, like just saying like, okay, what's the funniest thing I can find? Because I want to just like laugh as hard as I can and all that. And if I didn't, I'd be disappointed. And I just realized, wait a minute, did I just make it a chore to entertain myself? That does sound unhealthy. That doesn't make sense. So I think sometimes it gets to the point, and from what I understand, a lot of comedians experience this, where does everything have to be a joke? Like, does it have to actually become a burden to you? So there is some caution there as well. So I would say not just that there are other healthy alternatives to this type of quipping or wisecracking or smart alegory, whatever you want to call it. There's also the idea that you go so far down this rabbit hole that you start making it worse on yourself. Or people actually come to expect it from you, in which case now you're making it a job. I'm surprised that Peter Parker hasn't had more times where he's tried stand-up because people have said he makes so many quips. Thankfully, he hasn't.
Yeah. And speaking as somebody who has been told, or you want to talk about that expectation where if I'm not cracking jokes, because as I've alluded to, and as I'm sure many of our listeners could probably figure out, I'm just that guy in the group of friends who's typically cracking jokes, who's making comments, this, that, and the other. If I'm out and I'm not doing it, people ask me what's wrong. People ask me, are you okay? Are you feeling all right? Is something wrong? Or like, are you depressed? Like, no, I don't always have to make a joke. I don't always have to have something to say. And then it becomes a situation where, God damn it, now I feel like I have to say something. I'm not always in a funny mood. Sometimes I just want to sit back and gasp, be quiet. Sometimes I want to sit back and observe. Sometimes I want to let someone else take the lead. But if I don't do it, then everybody turns and looks at me and goes, well, when are you going to start with the funny? And then, as you said, then it becomes a chore. And then it becomes draining because I don't always want to be on. Sometimes I want to be off. Sometimes I want to be in, power saving mode, so to speak. And I just want to let other people do it. I'll laugh. I'll contribute to the conversation, but I don't have to be on all the time.
Then you got someone like me who usually has no problem with other people taking the lead in conversations or situations. And if I truly have something that I think is important to say, I'll definitely say it. But at the same time, it leads to, on more than one occasion that I like to admit, where either, or actually a combination of both, where some people will just like look and be stunned because they're wondering what it is that's just came out of my mouth, while other people are genuinely surprised, and maybe one or two will be laughing hysterically. And at this point, I am totally comfortable with that. As long as I know that someone is on, and that's what I love about this. I feel like I've witnessed the spectrum in play so many times that I definitely have come to appreciate when I'm in a good spectrum and when I'm not. And I finally think I have a decent grasp on when I'm not. That's what I really try and key on, like making sure I don't do that fatal mistake. I don't mind putting my foot in my mouth with enough people so that some people get it, some people don't. I say, okay, see, I get it. I'm not going to get everybody. Fine. But, losing the entire crowd, it's not going to happen anymore. I've made sure of that. I know that. I finally learned that limit. I think, let me not get too cocky.
Same. Exactly. And that's what we were saying earlier. It comes down to know your audience. But it also, the flip side to that is the audience has to know you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the audience has to know that sometimes I don't want to be funny.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just want to sit down and shut the up.
and similarly on that.
And if you don't let me sit down and shut the up, now I'm going to get real mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if I do crack a joke, it's not going to be funny. It's going to be cutting.
Right.
And I say this in self-awareness, and it's not always something that I'm proud of, and it is something that I'm working on. But I have an innate ability to find that thing that can make you uncomfortable, or that you may be insecure about, or you may not really want to talk that much about. And I will find it. I will find your weak spot and I will exploit it. And then I'll laugh my ass off and you're sitting there crying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, and it's, again, not something that I'm super proud of, but if I get pissed off, I lash out.
Yeah.
And I'll hurt.
Yeah.
Without regard for feelings. And then I'll feel like absolute dog shit later.
Yeah.
Because I have a super guilty conscience. But in the moment, all I'm thinking of is, you pushed me, I'm going to shove you back. And it's not right. That's not healthy. And it is something that I'm better at. But so if I'm in a quiet mood, don't ask me to make a joke. Because if I do, I'll laugh, you'll cry.
So
that's why I say the audience has to know you as much as you have to know your audience.
Anthony alluded to this about something I made as a comment to him that I didn't expect to do that. At the same time, it might as well get into the weeds here. It's fine. It's part of the reason why we're friends in the first place. So I had something very embarrassing happen to me very early in high school. And there is this guy just absolutely roasting me off to the side of the track. And
it was our first day in gym class, and as he was crossing the finish line, his shoe came off because he never tied his shoes.
That's true. It's why I wear slip-on professional shoes now.
Because you're lazy.
Yes, it's true. No, it's 100% true. I don't take the time to properly tie my shoes. I agree. I admit that 100%, which is what makes this better because I know that. So that's not something that bothers me. Like in that sense, it was embarrassing, but at the same time, it was like, yeah, it happens. So I literally in my mind said, I have to find this guy. Not because I was angry at him or I wanted to attack him or anything. It was more like, I'm glad that somebody in the moment actually had enough interest in me to even say that because I'm not that person. Like I'm not someone, even if something embarrassing happened, like I don't draw a crowd. I don't draw attention to myself. So for something like that to happen and then nobody else really was saying anything. I mean, they were laughing, but nobody was saying anything. He was the only one that actually was making what I thought were true, like smart wisecracks. I'm like, I like this guy's humor. And I know fully well that nobody's perfect. So I'm going to get his ass back at some point. And I did. Again.
And I think it's gone back and forth very well over the last 25 years.
That's right. That's right.
But see, in the moment, it was more like, I'm going to make that joke. Because, we're freshmen in high school and it's like a, kill or be killed type scenario. So I'm trying to look out for my own social standing, but also that the part of me that has a heart and was like, if I make a joke about it that's kind of funny, then it's going to be less damaging to you in the long run because then it's something that we can all just sort of laugh about and move past than having you be that guy whose shoe came off in gym class.
Which is funny because I would have been the first person like right after that to start making jokes about it. So I wasn't worried. I wasn't even thinking that way. If people thought of that, like what's the worst that happens? I go from being the quiet guy that has a lot of goals in life that, people don't want to hang around with otherwise to the quiet guy who people don't want to hang around with otherwise that his shoe came off. It wouldn't have changed anything for me unless people got to know me. And the ones that got to know me, what do you know? I still am friends with the ones that don't quite click because I remember some certain people just saying like, man, you are just too weird or you're just like, there's something off. And I'm like, thank you. Keep the compliments coming. All right. Enough of a tangent.
Really kind of got derailed into from quipping to let's, this mutual love bullshit.
See, but that's the problem because once again, we're two sides of the same coin with this. Quipping can be fantastic for building relationships. It can also do a lot of damage emotionally if you're not dealing with things underneath that are very serious.
And it can also alienate the audience. I don't know how many of our fans are still going to be listening by this point.
All right, enough of the emo stuff.
You'd be
Got
like,
it.
Jesus, these guys are just kissing each other's ass.
Well, guess what? We don't have a skit, so deal with it.
Exactly. Hopefully at some point in this episode, we made you laugh. We made you think. Hopefully we didn't make you cry. If we did.
That's a hell of a day.
Yeah.
That's a Jim Valvano,
Yeah.
Shout out to the V Foundation, out of nowhere.
Shout out to Jimmy V. Never give up. So I think that's as good a spot as any to end it. So there's no recommended reading because literally any comic you read, unless it's Batman or Punisher, is going to have some jokes in it. Why? Because comics.
That's right.
So the next episode we're going to be doing is Baphomet from The Wicked and the Divine. We're going to have special guest Jared from the Phantom Zone podcast on. So looking forward to that. Followed by Killer Croc, as requested by Ariel. And then Black Adam, as requested by Brian, who's got a good series of episodes coming up. And he gave me a list of names. And I said, well, Black Adam, DC fandom just happened. And they talked about, with the artwork. So Black Adam is sort of trending. I don't know if he's going to be trending in 3 weeks by the time we get around to him, but we're going to do him anyway. So that should be a fun, entertaining episode. So as always, you can find all of our shows on our website, capesonthecouch.live. If you go to capesonthecouch.live/nominations, this is the last week we're accepting nominations for our 100th episode awards show spectacular. Next episode, we will be announcing the nominees, or we will be, I don't know that we'll announce them in the episode, but at least announce where you can find the nominees and where you can vote. So as always, all of our social media plugs are at Capes on the Couch or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, not TikTok. Not yet. I've been hearing things that TikTok is a good venue for us. I don't really know how that would go, but if you want to see me not do a dance challenge, maybe tell me we should be on TikTok. Our website, our email address is capesonthecouch@gmail.com. You can send us some love, send us a review. If you were listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Podchaser, please feel free to leave us a rating and review. And if you email us a screen cap of your rating and review at capesonthecouch@gmail.com with your address, we'll send you stickers away saying thank you. So, Doc, as you tend to like to end our episodes with a witty joke or pun, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, wow. Look, a lot of the things that we say really come across very corny. We use a lot of dad jokes, but please understand, if that's not your personality, don't fake it. Otherwise, you'll be making a faux pas. You get it? Faux.
I've used that one myself.
Faux.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Means
God
fake.
damn it.
And then
yes. Stop explaining the joke. For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.